So now that I have this basic mechanic of my first person controller can run into these cubes, and I can capture data, I can improve the player health float. I'm gonna add a little alternative to this. I'm just gonna take one of my pickup cubes. I'm gonna Command D to duplicate, or I could right click on it in the hierarchy, and I'll move it over, just kind of offset it to the side. And I'm going to modify the material just by, I've created a red material here. And the red material is going to indicate that this is something we don't want to pick up. Or if we do, it'll reduce our health. I already have all the logic set up. I duplicated the cube, so we're still listening for the collision event. When I go to the picked up state for this cube, we have a float add, and we're already adding to our global player health. We're adding positive 10. I'm going to change that value to negative 10. So if we touch a red cube, our health should go down by 10. And I'll duplicate this cube. Actually, before I do, I'm going to call this is my bad cube. I'm going to have good cubes and bad cubes for this wireframe. So I'll duplicate the bad cube, and I'll just move this off to the side. So we want to get these. We don't want to get these. And really right now we're just in this testing phase, and so I want to be able to see my health go up and down. I'm able to see that because I have my player health manager here, empty game object, with simple logic that's running on it that says debug the value of my player health float. So that kind of shows me what's going on, but this is not really user friendly. I mean, it's good to test the logic and to make sure I have data doing what it's supposed to do, but I really want this information on screen. And so I'll create a UI object, a text object, and then what I'll do is I'll take this player health float, we'll convert it to a string data so that we can print it to screen in a text field, and then we'll use this state to constantly update or output the value of our player health to a UI object, a text UI object. And this gets pretty procedural in terms of kind of following the recipe of how to get this to work. But I'll walk through the logic here really quickly. So the first thing that we need on screen is that we want to get a text object, a UI component text object. And the way that we'll do this is we'll go to Game Objects, UI, and I'll choose text. Now, when we do this, we get a couple of different objects, and I want you to pay attention to what happens in the hierarchy panel over here. I'll choose UI text. You'll notice they get a canvas, text, and an event system. We can ignore the event system. For now, the canvas system, we're going to let it default. We have some options over here for this canvas object. Everything's cool. If I select the text object, this is the thing that I want to be mindful of initially. Inside the text object, we have a text component, and that text component has a text element that says new text. And we could just change this to whatever we want. I'll just type in some text. And this gets rendered during gameplay or in the game view. So if I just jump over to my game tab, you can see it says hello world here. I'll go back to my scene view. I don't see anything. It's because it's projecting on the camera. When I hit the play button, I should see some text showing up on screen. There it is. Hello world. I'm satisfied with that. Okay. Now the trick is this text element is printing to screen. It's printing this hard value, and what we really want is we don't want this hard value here. We want the value of our player health float. We got to jump through a few hoops. Now, we could take this canvas object or this text object, and we could build a state machine here that says, okay, go get the value, figure out what the player health float would be, and then translate it and update this information on itself. But we have an object that's really managing all the function of the player health. That's our player health manager, including things like, let's take the player health and print it to screen. So we already have a manager that's overseeing this. So we want the player health manager to conduct the logic to print to this text field here. Now, in order to output information into a text field, if we want it dynamic, we need a string data. We need a string variable, a string data type, And so we can establish this by going to variables. Now, this is not going to be a global variable. I don't need it to be a global variable because the only thing that's really going to talk to this bit of data or manage this bit of data is the player health manager. We're going to output the result of the data on this text object here, but the player health manager is going to be the thing that's doing that. Okay, so it's going to manage this data. So this is why I'm making the decision to keep this variable local. There are advantages to local variables versus global variables. We'll talk about those once we get a better handle on data types and variables. So I'm going to create a new variable. The variable type I'll set before. I just want to set this before I actually add the variable. But I want to set this as a string variable. And again, strings are alphanumeric variables. The Unity documentation does a really good job of describing the different variable types, describing the key concepts of variables, so make sure you give that a read. The new variable, I'm going to call this, this will be player health underscore str for string, and I'll add that. So we have a player health float, which is a global, and we have a player health str, which is a string, and you can see here that I have a local and a global variable. Now, I have my player health string selected. I can see the data type is a string. In the properties here, I see its title, and underneath that, I have a value. I don't want to leave it blank because I want to test this. I don't want to do too many things inside Unity or Playmaker without testing it, because then I got to backtrack and figure out where the bug is that was created. So the value of this string, we're going to manually set it to. This is string data, or just something that's unique, that we know will get the results when we see this on screen. When we see this data type on screen, we'll know we're using the value of this variable. Now again, the beauty of a variable is that this can change over time. So right now this says this is string data. Okay, so we have this variable. And now the key is to get this variable into this text object. So I'll select the text object. I want to get that variable in here in this field. And I'll use Playmaker to do this. I'll use Playmaker to manage this. Now, the workflow here is that I want to be able to drag this text object and do a get set property, which is a really powerful thing inside Playmaker. It's a powerful thing inside Unity, but you can access it through Playmaker. But the glitch is that my player health manager contains the state machine that I want to drag this into. So I'm just going to go to the state tab. Yet I need the text object in the inspector in order to grab that object and drag it into here. So this is the workflow. I'm going to select the text object. I'm temporarily going to go up to the inspector, and over to the right is a little lock icon. I'll click on the lock icon. And what that means is that as I click around on these different game objects, you'll notice that this inspector is not currently updating. Okay, I'm fixed on this text object. Okay, that will allow me then to go to the player health manager, identify the state, make sure I'm in the state tab, and now I can grab this text object or this text component and drag it into my state field. Now when I do that, I get this little pop-up down here. Hopefully your pop-up is showing up over here. But if it doesn't show up over here like it's supposed to, if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, you should get a get property or set property option. The get property and set property, we can either get data from an inspector component, but in this case, we want to set some data. So we want to set the property of this text script. Now, I now have a set property action. Okay, now went from dragging this text object in. Now, this text component has a text field here. So what we need to do is in the set property action, we're targeting this text object. That's what we want. The object type, we're going to let it default. It's a Unity type. The property that we want to target is an element called text. And text has string data. That's what this is. We typed in hello world initially. We made string data. So I'm going to click on this drop-down menu. There's lots of different information in here. We'll take a look at all this different cool component stuff in our next project, but I'm looking for the text item here. So I'll find text, string, there we go. And so currently what we're doing, we have this action saying, go talk to this text object up here, identify the text field, and set the value to what? Well, currently it's just saying set the value to whatever we type in here, right? And we don't want to type in, we've established a string variable that we want to use for the result of this text field. And so whenever we come across a field in Playmaker that gives us the choice to hard code a value, if we see this little button here over on the right side, that allows to toggle between a hard value and a variable. So I'm going to click on this button, and we're going to set this value to our Playmaker, or our player health string. Okay, so we're going to set, instead of hello world, it's going to say whatever the value of our player health string is. I want that to happen every frame, and this is something that's easy to overlook. If we don't do it every frame, it'll just update during the first frame, and then it'll never change. And if this is outputting our player health data, we're not going to see it as it increases and decreases. So I'll hit the play button. Now, right now, it's not showing us the result of our player health. It's showing us the result of our player health string. Okay, and I can modify my health by running into these, and I can check that debug that's down here on the right side. But I'm not printing the value yet of player health. And the reason for that, I'll toggle the play button here, is that we do have a global float that's tracking that information, but you'll notice that when we try to set the value, the only thing it lets us set the value of this text field is a string value, and a float value is not a string value. So the easiest thing to do then would be to convert our float, our player health string, our player health float, to our player health string. And we'll do that really quickly, and then we'll review this process. So at this point, I'll just collapse the debug float action, and in fact, I'll even disable it because I'm pretty confident that this mechanic will output the player health to screen here in just a moment, so I can ignore this. The other thing I need to do a little bit of cleanup is that I'm still locked on the text object, and it's kind of already served its purpose. I was able to drag and drop that text element into my Playmaker state and establish the set property action, which allowed me to manipulate the value of this. And I don't need it anymore, so I'll just unlock it, and now it'll switch back to whatever we have selected. I'm going to go back to the Player Health Manager, and we're currently setting the property of this text, and we're doing it every frame, but I want to get our global float into the equation here. So what we can do is there's the ability to convert one data type to another, and this will be an easy way to get content up on screen of player health to debug. I'm going to go to convert, and I want to convert a float to a string. So I'll double click, and I just need to satisfy these fields. So the float variable that we want to use, that we want to convert, is our global player health float, and the string value that we want to store this in, that we want to convert it to, is our player health string. Okay, we have a format field here. We don't need to use this, although we could use this to kind of put some text on the front end of it or do some other things. But I want to make sure that this converts every frame, because if we're not converting it every frame, we won't get an update on screen. So I want to make sure that I check every frame. And at this point, when I hit the play button, rather than having the value of the default string data printed on screen, I should have the default value of player health. And I can confirm this because when I pick up the first cube, it goes from 0 to 10. When I pick up the second cube, it goes from 10 to 20. And now when I run over the bad cubes, it goes back down to 0. Okay, so I have the working logic and it's outputting to screen, so I can debug it really easily. I'll toggle the play button. I'll get rid of my debug float. I'm convinced I don't need it anymore. So that is kind of the high-level overview of the Player Manager. I'll review this really quickly, boil it down to workflow to the point where we delete the player health manager. Now, the only thing to keep in mind here is keep in mind that we already have the player health float, the global player health float. So if I go to global variables, we already have this established, okay? So when I delete my player health manager, like I'm going to do right now, command delete, I still have access to a global variable. If I go to Playmaker, editor, global variables, that Playmaker health float still exists. The Playmaker, the player health float still exists. The player health string went away when I destroyed the health manager. So let's do this. Let's create a new health manager. I'll create an empty game object, and I'll do this quickly. I'm going to call this health manager. I'll integrate a few other things into the workflow here as we go. The first thing is that by default, this object has an inspector icon, which only shows up when it's selected. And just to the left of the name, just to the left of this little checkbox where you can activate, there's this icon, this little cube icon. If you click on this, this will allow you to change the icon of this object. And if I choose one of these labels, it'll show up in the scene. And what's useful about that, it'll inherit, the label will show up with the name of the object. In this case, because it's an empty game object, when I deselect it, it's still there. It's kind of a little visual reference that there's an object in there called Health Manager, and you don't see that in the game view. So it's just a little simple trick. I'm going to move this up a little bit. There's my Health Manager. I'm going to add a state machine, and the state machine is going to have a state called idle. The job of this state machine is to ultimately track the value of player health, but then print it to screen. So I'm going to get rid of my canvas and my event system just so that we could repeat that process as well. So I'm going to introduce a UI element, text. The text element, this is the thing that I want to influence with my health manager. So I'm going to lock this inspector. I'm going to go to my health manager, and I'm going to drag this text field into, try that again. I'm going to drag this into, okay, I don't have my state selected on health manager. That's why it's not letting me do that. So I'll select my state. There we go. And I'll grab the text and drag that in. Okay. Again, my window's popping up down here. So I'm going to choose set property. I'm done with this inspector window, so I'll unlock it. But I do want to find the property that I want to influence, which is text, and I want to set the string. Okay, so the string value that I'm setting, I want to set this to a variable, and I don't have any string variables available, so I'm going to create a new one, and I'll call this player health string, or I could say, player health print to screen, whatever. So here's my player health string. I'm not even going to set a default value of this because I'm going to feed in, I'm going to convert the player health float to this string. So what we'll do is we'll go find the convert category of actions, convert float to string, and we'll find the global player health. I'll get that one out. Global, this player health float, which is global. We'll convert it to the string variable, which happens to be local. And we want to make sure that we do that every frame. Otherwise, we're going to do it just on the first frame redraw. Our health might be 0 at that point. We could improve or decrease our health, add to or decrease our health, and it would still remain the same if we're not converting it constantly or every frame. And we want to make sure that we're setting the property of this text field every frame. When I'm done and satisfied, I'm pretty convinced that those are going to work. I didn't make any mistakes. I like to collapse these actions, so I'm not looking at the parameters. I'll hit play, and there's the value of health on screen. If I go and pick up and I see the results changing, I know I'm in good shape. If your value of your health is not changing on screen, chances are you forgot to check one of these every frame commands. So you want to make sure that both of those are checked. So that's the kind of the core health system. Now we have some feedback on screen. We have a basic health manager. It's not doing anything. It's not managing anything per se, other than the printout of the value of player health on screen. But we'll fix that in the next presentation.